The news reports that flickered across black and white memory spoke softly of another fallen star, another Hollywood name, reduced to a final headline. They announced the death as if it were ordinary, as if it were inevitable. But behind those brief reports lay a life that had burned too brightly, too recklessly, and too painfully to ever fade quietly. What the cameras did not say was that her ending had been written long before. Her body failed her, carved into a story of ambition, scandal, desire, and self-destruction that Hollywood never wanted to remember. The mystery does not begin with her death. It begins years earlier, on January 21, 1927, when police reports quietly recorded the arrest of a once celebrated actress after a violent confrontation in a Los Angeles hotel. The headline spoke of assault, intoxication, and disgrace. But the real mystery was how a woman who had once been hailed as a rising star of the silent screen had fallen so far, so fast, and so publicly. That night did not just expose a scandal. It cracked open the hidden truth of a life already unraveling. Long before she became Mary Nolan. Long before Hollywood learned to fear her volatility and desire her beauty. She was born Imogene Robertson on December 18, 1902, in Louisville, Kentucky. Her birth did not arrive with glamour or promise. It arrived quietly, into a working-class family struggling to survive in an America that offered little mercy to women with big dreams. Her father worked unstable jobs, her mother carried the emotional weight of a household that never quite felt secure, and the atmosphere of her childhood was marked by instability, absence, and a longing for escape. From an early age, Imogene understood that survival meant performance. She learned to read moods, to charm adults, to shift her personality depending on who was watching. According to those close to her later in life, she displayed a restless energy even as a child, a hunger for attention mixed with deep emotional vulnerability. There were no stages or spotlights yet, only a growing awareness that being ordinary felt unbearable. By her early teens, her family relocated, chasing opportunity the way so many Americans did during the early 20th century. Stability never arrived. School became secondary to survival, and adolescence brought not safety but exposure. Imogene entered her teenage years during a time when young women were often pushed toward early labor, early marriages, or quiet resignation. She chose none of those paths. Instead, she gravitated toward performance, modeling, and beauty contests, using her striking looks as currency in a world that valued women only when they were visible. In her late teens, she made the first irreversible decision of her life. She left home. The exact date is blurred by conflicting accounts, but by early 1920, Imogene Robertson was no longer a daughter or a student. She was alone, navigating cities that promised excitement and delivered danger. She posed for photographers, took small modeling jobs, and learned quickly that admiration often came with conditions. Hollywood had not yet claimed her, but it was already shaping her expectations and her wounds. Her first major turning point came when she caught the attention of a German film producer during the early 1920s. This opportunity did not lead west to Hollywood, but east across the Atlantic. In 1925, she traveled to Germany, where the film industry was flourishing in the aftermath of World War I. There, she reinvented herself completely. Imogene Robertson became Imogene Wilson, then finally Mary Nolan, a name crafted to sound sophisticated, modern, and marketable. Germany embraced her in a way America never had. She starred in several successful films, quickly gaining attention for her beauty and intensity. For the first time, she experienced real fame. Crowds recognized her. Studios invested in her image, but beneath the surface, the same instability followed her. According to those close to her during this period, Nolan struggled with alcohol, emotional regulation, and destructive relationships. Fame did not calm her demons, it amplified them. Her German success caught the attention of Hollywood studios, always eager to reclaim American talent that had proven itself abroad. In 1927, Mary Nolan returned to the United States under contract with Universal Pictures. This was her official breakthrough, the moment that should have secured her place among Hollywood's elite. She arrived with confidence, notoriety, and expectations that bordered on desperation. She was no longer chasing fame, she was demanding it. But Hollywood in the late 1920s was ruthless, especially to women who refused to be controlled. Nolan's behavior quickly earned her a reputation. She was described as difficult, unpredictable, and emotionally volatile. Some believe she was already struggling with addiction by this point, while others insist the pressure of studio control pushed her deeper into self-destructive patterns. Rumors persisted that executives viewed her more as a liability than an asset, despite her undeniable screen presence. The tension reached a breaking point on January 21, 1927, when Nolan was arrested following a violent altercation. The details were sensational. Newspapers framed her as a fallen woman, a cautionary tale of excess and moral decay. What they did not explore was the psychological collapse unfolding behind the scenes. The arrest marked the moment Hollywood stopped protecting her. The illusion shattered, and Mary Nolan became a problem to be managed rather than a star to be nurtured. That night changed everything. From this point forward, her story would no longer be about ascent, but about survival, and the shadows were only beginning to close in. Hollywood did not forgive easily, and after that January night in 1927, Mary Nolan felt the shift immediately. The studios still needed her face, her allure, her dangerous magnetism, but they no longer trusted her spirit. She was cast, but watched, promoted, but restrained. Every smile she offered to the cameras carried the tension of a woman who knew she was already being replaced in the minds of powerful men. Despite the growing unease around her reputation, Nolan's career reached its visible peak between 1927 and 1929, when she appeared in several high-profile Universal Pictures productions. Films like Sinners in Heaven and Desire, Under the Elms placed her alongside established stars, presenting her as a sultry, modern woman shaped for the jazz age. On screen, she embodied temptation and fragility in equal measure. Off-screen, the same qualities became weapons used against her. Fame did not bring stability. It brought exposure. Every party she attended became a potential headline. Every argument, every drink, every late night fed a growing narrative that she was uncontrollable. According to those close to her during this period, Nolan drank heavily, not as an indulgence, but as anesthesia. Alcohol softened the constant anxiety, the fear of losing relevance, the awareness that youth was currency and time was ruthless. Her romantic life became another source of scandal. She was linked to multiple men in the industry, some married, some powerful. Rumors persisted that she used relationships as leverage for roles, while others believed she was being exploited by men who promised protection and delivered abandonment. The truth likely lived somewhere between those extremes. Nolan's relationships were intense, volatile, and often destructive, mirroring the instability she had known since childhood. By late 1928, Hollywood was changing, and Mary Nolan was changing with it, though not in ways that benefited her. The arrival of sound films transformed the industry overnight. For many silent stars, this transition proved fatal to their careers. Nolan possessed a voice suited for talkies, but studios had already begun distancing themselves from her. Her off-screen reputation mattered more than her on-screen potential. The turning point arrived quietly but decisively in 1929, when Universal chose not to renew her contract. There was no dramatic announcement, no farewell premiere. One day she was a studio actress. Next, she was not. The loss devastated her. Acting was not just her profession. It was her identity, her shield against the emptiness she feared most. Unemployment exposed everything she had been suppressing. Without a studio structure, Nolan's addictions worsened. Financial instability followed quickly. According to acquaintances from this period, she moved frequently, borrowed money, and relied on fading connections that grew thinner with each request. Hollywood has little patience for fallen stars, especially women whose beauty no longer guarantees obedience. Her public appearances became erratic. Some nights she dazzled, reclaiming flashes of her former charm. Other nights she arrived, intoxicated, emotionally raw, unpredictable. The same press that once celebrated her now documented her decline with cruel fascination. Headlines framed her as a cautionary tale, proof that ambition without restraint led only to ruin. The early 1930s marked a slow, painful erosion rather than a single collapse. Nolan attempted to return to film work, securing minor roles and uncredited appearances, but nothing restored her former status. Each rejection deepened her sense of exile. According to those close to her, she spoke often of betrayal, convinced the industry had conspired to erase her. Whether paranoia or painful clarity, the belief haunted her. By 1931, her health began to visibly deteriorate. Years of heavy drinking took their toll. She suffered from chronic illness, weight fluctuations, and emotional instability that bordered on despair. Friends described mood swings that moved rapidly from euphoria to rage to desolation. The woman who once commanded attention now struggled to maintain coherence. Her personal life offered no refuge. Relationships during this period were short-lived and frequently abusive. Some believe Nolan gravitated toward destructive partners because chaos felt familiar. Others argue she simply lacked the emotional resources to choose stability. What remains clear is that love never arrived as salvation. It arrived as another battlefield. As the decade progressed, Nolan slipped further from public memory. By the mid-1930s, she was no longer a name audiences recognized. She lived modestly, sometimes desperately, clinging to memories of fame that felt increasingly unreal. According to those who encountered her during these years, she spoke often of the past, replaying triumphs as if repetition could summon them back into existence. Yet even in decline, there were moments of haunting clarity. Nolan reportedly acknowledged her addictions, her mistakes, her role in her own undoing. But awareness did not equal escape. Hollywood had moved on, and so had the world. The star system that created her had no mechanism for rehabilitation, only replacement. By the early 1940s, Mary Nolan was largely invisible. Illness confined her. Poverty loomed constantly. The press no longer followed her because tragedy loses novelty when it lingers too long. She was alive, but absent from the cultural conversation. A ghost wandering the edges of an industry she helped illuminate. Her final years were marked by isolation and failing health. On October 5, 1948, Mary Nolan died in Los Angeles at the age of 45. The official cause was complications related to years of alcoholism and illness. There were no cameras outside her residence, no crowds, no cinematic farewell. The news reports were brief, almost apologetic, as if unsure whether the world still remembered her name. What remained was a question larger than her death. How does a woman rise so high, fall so completely, and disappear so thoroughly that her story itself becomes a mystery? Mary Nolan's legacy is not found in awards or box office records. It lives in the warning embedded within her life. She was a woman shaped by desire, consumed by ambition, and discarded by a system that demanded perfection while offering no protection. Her story exposes the fragile boundary between stardom and erasure, between adoration and abandonment. In the end, the news reports spoke of a death. But the truth is that Mary Nolan had been disappearing for years, piece by piece, headline by headline, silence by silence. And as those reports faded from the screen, they left behind a haunting reminder that Hollywood remembers its stars only when they shine, and forgets them the moment the light begins to flicker. By the time the world reached the post-war years, Mary Nolan was no longer living in Hollywood. She was surviving inside it. The city still glittered, still promised reinvention, but for her, reinvention had become a myth she could no longer afford to believe. The studios that once shaped her image had erased her name from their future, and the younger actresses who replaced her never knew whose shadow they were stepping into. In the years leading up to her death, Nolan's life narrowed. Her social circle dissolved. Former friends drifted away, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. She had become a reminder of what Hollywood preferred not to see. According to those who encountered her during this period, she oscillated between moments of startling self-awareness and stretches of deep denial. Some days she spoke with sharp intelligence about the industry's hypocrisy. Other days she insisted a comeback was imminent, clinging to hope as if it were oxygen. Her health deteriorated rapidly in the mid-1940s. Years of alcohol abuse had weakened her body beyond repair. She suffered repeated hospitalizations, chronic pain, and emotional exhaustion that left her physically diminished and psychologically fragile. There were no interviews, no public pleas, no redemption arc waiting to be discovered. Her decline unfolded quietly, unseen by the audience that once applauded her. Her last known public presence occurred in early 1948, when acquaintances recalled seeing her frail, withdrawn, and visibly ill. She no longer resembled the confident woman who once commanded attention on European film sets and Hollywood soundstages. The transformation was complete. Fame had not faded. It had inverted, leaving behind only its absence. On October 5, 1948, Mary Nolan died in Los Angeles. She was 45 years old. The cause of death was attributed to complications stemming from long-term alcoholism and illness. There was no scandal attached to her passing, no dramatic final act, no mystery for tabloids to exploit. The newspapers offered restrained notices, brief acknowledgments that barely scratched the surface of the life that had ended. But endings are rarely as simple as death certificates suggest. Mary Nolan's story is not merely one of addiction or poor choices. It is a story about a woman who entered an industry designed to consume her, elevate her, and abandon her in equal measure. She arrived during a time when female stars were products, not people, valued for their beauty, silence, and compliance. When she failed to remain controllable, the system responded not with support, but with erasure. Some believe her volatility sealed her fate. Others argue it was the industry's intolerance for imperfection that destroyed her. What cannot be denied is that Mary Nolan lived intensely, desperately, and honestly in a world that punished women for refusing to remain ornamental. Her breakdowns were not just personal failures. They were fractures along the fault lines of Hollywood itself. Her legacy exists in fragments, in faded films, in archival photographs, in whispered, cautionary tales passed down through film history. She's remembered not as a legend, but as a warning. A reminder of how quickly the spotlight can turn cruel, how easily admiration becomes abandonment. And perhaps that is why her story still lingers. Because when the news reports announced her death, they did not mark the end of a career. They marked the final confirmation of a disappearance that had begun decades earlier. A star who burned fiercely, briefly, and painfully, until there was nothing left for the world to take. The headlines faded, the screens went dark, and somewhere between those closing frames, Mary Nolan slipped fully into silence, leaving behind a question Hollywood never answered. What happens to the stars who fall before we are done watching? That is the mystery. And this was Starlit Mystery.